So today we are going to discuss what is labeled as SPML, right? So selective percutaneous muscular lengthening, and in a more general way, the ideas of the, say, milder surgeries, right? So you see that will be really the idea. So if I were to share the screen, I will say something like this: milder surgeries for cerebral palsy. I'm not sharing the screen, I'm aware of that. Okay, так, where is the screen sharing? There it is, right? So that's what I will need anyway. Okay, so milder surgeries for cerebral palsy. So that brings us into sort of several dimensions, right? So several dimensions. That is offering me some elegant. Oh wow, you see, that's a smart AI suggestion. Okay, let's follow up with this. So milder surgeries for the cerebral palsy. Of course, this SPML thing. So this is really just a form. So in that sense, that's just an example, right? It's example of milder surgeries. So as a result, so what we are going to discuss is this: like first we have to discuss the bigger picture, like what are the surgeries in general, right, per se, and then get into the next dimension of the SPML. So that's kind of one dimension. And the other dimension would be the conversation about the goals and the outcomes, right? So you see, therefore, here we discuss big and small surgeries. So their goals and rationale. And then on a separate note, we are going to discuss the so-called functional outcomes for cerebral palsy, right? And then we will also discuss the, let's call it, the structural preventions. So that will be the dimensions over which the whole conversation will go. And of course, when we talk about the structural dimensions, so those are joint deformities, contractures, etc., with the particular focus that people have on the entire hip subluxation domain. So these are the key ideas. Okay, I think that that's kind of quite straightforward, and as you know, I will probably flip back and forth between these subjects, but let's start in a more organized way with what Master Google gives us, and just do the basic thing by typing the SPML itself, and this is what we're going to get, right? So what is SPML surgery for CP? Is a specific surgical technique designed to lengthen muscles, right? Lengthen muscles in order to improve the movement ability of children with cerebral palsy to sit, stand, or walk. Right? So on paper, everything sounds really, really good. So, and then we have to kind of dig a little bit further, and you see here on the first page we've got this small, well, we got a review article from the PubMed, which discusses the SPML for children with cerebral palsy. And then here is some sort of the British-based review, which is from 5-6 years ago. And then we have all sorts of the additional comments to this. So let's start with this review, since it's not done by the people who are actually doing this SPML thing, but by the review site. Now, or maybe even before this, right? So you see there is actually a good article here, so which is showing you the technical tools. See, here we are. That's one of the set of people from Italy who are promoting their own version of doing this SPML, but with our own original title, the fibrotomy. Well, fibrotomy actually is a more general one, right? And they discuss the bigger picture really from the surgical perspective. But what we are seeing here is really the tools, so that you wouldn't be particularly overly surprised. So the bigger knife, that's the classical surgical knife used to do bigger surgeries until today, right? And here, this is the smaller one, which is called the ophthalmic knife, right? Knife, sorry. Ophthalmic, that's obviously ophthalmologist. This is the eye doctor, right? So you see, this is the micro knife, which is used for surgeries done on such a delicate place like the eye, right? So therefore, the whole technical solution was to switch from the bigger knife to a smaller knife, right? And in fact, originally, the person who came up with this whole idea of the fibrotomy and doing it, okay, so it's a, well, I'll start fibrotomy for the cerebral palsy. So that's more general thing, right? So it's designed for, well, it's actually, here it says the one which came from the actually from the dental practices. So we'll type in Ulzibat method. So in fact, originally it was this gentleman. Yeah, so that's the gentleman who actually pioneered this. So in fact, what you have now as the kind of Western versions of this fibrotomy applications has been pioneered by Valery Ulzibat, who actually died like over 20 years ago. But fact is, his method became popular in the Soviet Union around, I think, 1980s. So during my time there in Russia in the 1990s, I obviously had a lot of experience with observing the people who had the who've gone through the Ulzibat method. And you see, for example, today there is still some popular followers who are in Europe, so who are kind of labeling it after themselves. So the one who is particularly popular in Spain is Nazarov, right? So you see Nazarov surgery, which is obviously the Russian name, Dr. Nazarov. So you see where he is talking about him doing it. So you see, this is called the myofasciotomia. So this is major ambulatory surgical intervention. Okay, so you can, well, you are very welcome to read all this. So that's another set of the same names, right? So you see where the logic is this, right? Freeze the myofascial system, being advanced medical surgery. It's a minimal multi-level surgery, optimizes overall patient development. So these are all these promotional statements. I think this is also another gentleman by a similar name, Nazarkin surgeon. So that's, you see, that's another one. So that's the guy with a different name, well, with a similar name, but okay, so he's actually the expert of this original method. So he's the one who does, I think, travels also across Europe. And I heard that he had the surgeries done. He has a certain base in Czech Republic or something like this. So that's the European scene. So SPML is a specifically American name, but the logic is the same. So it all comes back with the bigger, well, with the whatever are the labels about advanced, multi-level, and so on and so on. But the logic is this: instead of cutting things with the big knife, they're being cut with the smaller knife, right? So that's the thing. Now, without us moving anywhere further and kind of getting any other conversations, so we always can bring this thing. So what is better? Big surgery versus small surgery? That's not a difficult question to answer. So quite obviously, the big surgery has a lot more of the side effects than the small surgery. That's very, very clear. So with this out of the way, let's discuss what's the philosophy behind it and what is our position on this. Now, just as a preliminary note, let's do this, the GMFCS curves. GMFCS is the gross motor function classification system, and as you can see, it ranges from level 1 to level 5, right? So, in fact, on the practical side, we should divide it maybe in 3 big categories. So milder forms, this is level 1 and level 2. So these are the children who are getting quite forcefully or kind of quite intensely integrated into the standard social and school environment. So where it's considered that their disability is mild, and then they are supposed to perform on the same scale. So level 3, this is the child whose natural capacity is to be more in the manual wheelchair. So in other words, the ones where the performance of the legs, the ability to do the natural weight bearing is quite limited, but the arms are strong enough to do a lot of, say, functional things and so on. So now, this is the level where we are already getting more interested, right? So you see level 1 and level 2, we will discuss as a kind of secondary consideration, because that's not where the main, like the main field of our specialization is, right? So, and then it comes to this level 3, where with the level 3, we have the really big question. Because you see on a standard level, and when the child is mild, when the child is younger, the lower, or sort of the upper, the better components, or the lower components of the level 4, they are also somewhere here, because at least that's a child who is kind of more placeable in their standing frame, the child who has some great intention to move and so on. So this is where we have this essential thing, right? So you see the kid here is shown in the walker, but then the main thing is the wheelchair. Now, where does the conversation go? The conversation, the central part of this conversation is this, that around the age of 5, 9 children out of 10 in this category could be made to sort of walk. So only 1 out of 10 actually doesn't. And then by the age of 15, the proportion reverses. Now, only 1/10 of them are able to do some sort of walking, right? And it's, again, not a high quality one. And 9 out of 10, they are the ones who get to the wheelchair. And in fact, this is a question which we're going to return over and over again, discussing their age groups and discussing their overall like trajectory around which the child is developing and what do we really want to achieve and what should be our, well, what is our available strategies. Let's put it like this, right? I'm going to avoid the words should because the choice is always yours, and in that respect, it is made under well, a certain bunch of different circumstances where the logic that we can give you is just one of them, right? So, but I'm going to give you this bigger picture. So that's level 3. So, and again, the SPML and alike types of surgeries here, so their logic revolves around the same thing. How to get the child into this functional type of activity and try to sort of keep them there as long as possible. Now, statistically, that's what we have to acknowledge, that in the long run, it doesn't work. But the thing is that by the time the child is about 15 years old and past all this kind of difficulties and challenges of the growth spurt and the teenage years, nobody remembers what was there back when the child was 5, 6, 7, 8, even 10 years old, because that is the period where things kind of start falling apart and there are a lot of different troubles happen. And in that sense, everything just kind of get blurred. And then, well, that was one of the things which was good back then. But then, like, things started to crumble. And no one is really responsible for the fact that, well, by the time they are 15, that only 9 out of 10 are able to bear any kind of weight in a vertical position. So that's the conversation which goes there. And of course, this conversation then adds the second part, which is the part about the next level, which would be the conversation about the deformities. So, because the more severe conditions, well, level 3 we would probably need to call moderate, right? So those were mild. So that would be considered more the moderate. And severe conditions, that's level 4 and 5. And as we can see on this particular screen, what we're observing here is this. If we look at the level 5, so this is a child who is not being able to get their self-support, requires wheelchair for any kind of movement from early on, and so on and so forth, and the one who is expected to get the significant deterioration starting from the age of, say, 7, 8, and onwards. So, because, again, in order to make it clear, let's put this GMFCS curves. So these are the prediction curves of the development. So this is where you can see all this kind of standard ways of how the things go. So where we observe the standard best performance, which is about the age 7, 8, and then either it's a plateau or the deterioration that could be observed. But again, this is just the conversation which talks about the absolute function, right? So it doesn't talk about the appearance, doesn't talk about the deformities, it just talks about the functions. So that's where we are. So this is where we can see this clearly. So that's severe, and this is moderate. So the logics are different. Moderate conditions. This is where the surgeries are usually done for functional promotion. The severe conditions, the surgeries are done for structural, what is called prevention. Because, of course, the surgical correction, right? The surgical correction refers to the period which is coming post 18, 20, so when the child has completed their skeletal growth. So that's where we'll get the surgical correction. So that's more or less the landscape. And you see, what I want you to keep in mind is this. So the bigger set of questions when it comes to a moderately affected child and then to the severely affected child, the one that we are bringing on is this, is that what do you do early, what to do early to get the best outcome later. So, you see, that's a very important logic that we are trying to bring on, right? And this is where my central message to the parents has always been. Whether the child is 1 or 2 or whatever, 5, 6 or 7, 8, we always should look ahead. Because, in fact, when the child is small, we are the closest to the beginning. We are the closest to the potential for tissue remodeling and for the structural transformations. So that's a central part which we're really looking at as the most important thing. Like, how do we organize this early years? In which way? So in order to get the most in the long run. And of course, there are different logics there, right? So there is a difficult period, which is here, say from 10, 11 to about, say, 15, 16, where you have this growth spurt. And this growth spurt typically brings the multidimensional deterioration. And, you know, there are two logics to discuss here. So the logic number one would be, okay, live fast, die young, of sort, right? So you see, in other words, like when my kid is still cute and young and enthusiastic and so on and so forth and not deformed, well, and apparently they like to move and they want to be like the other children and they want to be on the playground and all this other stuff and so on. So let's try to kind of make this childhood last. And then when the catastrophe happens at the age of 11, 12 and further, well, what can we do? So are we really having the guarantees that we're able to prevent the catastrophes there? So, and well, shall we even think of life beyond that? So that is a tangible logic. I mean, it's not something that I would kind of criticize or say, well, guys, you are like just living the day and I think it's wrong or whatever. No, I don't think it's wrong. The only motivation that I have is that you would make informed decisions and that you would actually make those decisions uh, based on understanding their larger, the entire growth spectrum, the growth period. And if you decide that, okay, this is this big unknown, and we don't know whether we even do everything kind of the right way, whether we're going to come out sort of in a glorious and safe fashion on the other way, on the other side of this big kind of challenge, crossing this river of the growth spurt and the change of the hormones and everything else. So in that sense, okay, we just dance and celebrate while it lasts and while the child is still kind of light in a direct way, right? So like not heavy, so still being facially and so on, not affected and balanced and symmetrical and so on, and kind of baby-like cute, right? So, that's logic number one. Logic number one is that trying to get this babyhood lust, right? So you see, that's the babyhood, or maybe like babyhood slash toddlerhood, actually, probably, if we can say this. There is babyhood is understandable expression. I think toddlerhood is also understandable. So, because babyhood, that is more often applied to the children with the more severe disabilities because they are staying in the babyhood. So yeah, that is more the toddlerhood extended, or the babyhood extended if we talk about the more severe child. So that's logic number one. And in that respect, SPML and overall all the other types of the therapies of this kind, so which are trying to promote early activities and so on, so they are in fact working within this logic, because like nobody knows what they're really doing, so they're just sort of jumping around and trying to maximize the happy activity of the child. So, and of course, now there is a logic number two, right? And the logic number two is the logic where we are trying to maximize the child's kind of what could be seen as the developmental assets of the child, get them the strongest possible foundation. So when this big bad wolf of the growth spurt comes, right? So you see, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to draw the wolf, right? So you see something like, I don't know, no, it turned out to be more the crocodile, whatever. No, never mind. I'll stop this. So that doesn't work. So probably we have to also get a separate note on how to draw the wolf. So anyway, so in our case, we talk about maximizing the assets for being able to cross that river and withstand the challenges as much as possible. Now, within this logic, SPML or any other surgeries, they don't help, even though they sell themselves. They also try to sell themselves under the preventive label. So that happens. So this is what we are going to discuss. Now, quite obviously, you realize, right, that I am personally representing the second logic, that, you know, if we go back to the story of the three pigs, which was my, probably top favorite fairy tale of my childhood. Okay, three pigs and houses. Houses they built. Let's see what Google is telling us. Okay, so here we are. So here we have, all right, I don't know, whatever it is, but looks like it. I can, oh, I see, you can order 3 different houses. Okay, open image in the new tab. Let's see. So anyway, so the house of straw, the house of sticks, and the house of bricks. So our logic is to discuss the house of bricks and also to point out why the people who are trying to promote the surgery as if it was also the house of bricks, they're actually not giving an accurate representation, but generally that's it. So personally, this is what I'm saying, is that this is entirely your choice. Which strategy fits better for you? So, and if you want to get into those, the house of straw or the house of sticks type of logics, then within that logic, the SPML as a mild surgery, which tries to extend this to the maximum, this kind of happy dancing type of period, and delay the winter, then yeah, very welcome. It's entirely within your choice, right? And now you might still ask, but does it mean that we have to, that it's not compatible with ABR? Well, no, it's compatible with ABR. I'm not saying that it's not possible, because with ABR, especially now with the vibro tools and so on, we have the tools of the kind of universal tonic improvement, right? So you see, we have the tonic improvement, and we can build the connections and distributions which are helping the child anyway. So whether you do surgeries or not, whether you run and rush for the functional things and trying to kind of keep on dancing, that's entirely up to you. So in that respect, yes, tactically, ABR can still help you on a tactical level, can still very much help you in terms of the keep on dancing. If that's what you want, that's your choice. And the typical thing is that if the person wants to keep on dancing, so that will be a kind of this usual combinations when people would be doing, I don't know, maybe 5, 7 hours or maybe even less of ABR, right? And then we'll be doing quite a bunch of different activities, right? Just really activities, whether it's the activities outside, whether it's the social activities, whether it's the school and kindergarten activities. So this is, again, entirely up to you. And this is something that only you can make a decision. So from our side, we are always here to help you, whatever choice you make. Now, as I said, when I grew up, and I have probably listened to this house of, I had an LP, right? So the vinyl with this tale, and I think between the age of 4 and 5, I pretty much, like, one of them got completely inaudible because I listened to it so many times, right? So you see, I had to get, and I had to actually get I got a second one from my grandmother so that I can get back to it. And so so in other words, I used 2 LPs within a space of maybe a year and a half or 2, right? So that's why at the time I was really very fascinated with the story. And every time I listened to it, I was like, from the very beginning, in the camp of this strategic long-term peak, because maybe also since I was a child, I wasn't so much in terms of, singing and dancing. So that wasn't my forte. And that's why this strategic pig, I found his, you see, and that's an important thing, right? So you see, this strategic pig, I didn't find his part being boring or being a sacrifice. Like, when the first 2, they were already kind of cheerfully, they completed this kind of half-assed job, right? So you see, and they were cheerfully dancing and doing all sorts of activities. You see, this strategic pig was actually very much enjoying the process because he had a kind of bigger vision, bigger plan. And this is a very important thing to have, right? So you see, because, there are several layers to this fairy tale, right? Any good fairy tale, right? So has different layers to it. Because, one way of interpreting this fairy tale is to really put it into this kind of delayed gratification perspective, right? But it's not even delayed. Yeah, it's a delayed gratification. But at the same time, the question is, what is gratification there? Is it their quiet enjoyment of whatever, some cozy sitting in front of your fireplace, right? Or is this a delayed prevention? That's also an important thing, right? Delayed prevention. So because when it's being sold as, well, the big bad wolf who is going to come, and if one is quite sure that the big wolf is going to come, so then it is being seen and sold as the story, like the moral of the story, right? So is that if something bad is going to happen and you're quite sure about it, so then even if you don't like it, you have to make an effort and actually work and get this delayed gratification part. But for me, I never saw this as a moral of the story, because if you really hate the process and only do it for the unsure outcome, because there are 2 kind of big question marks, right? At the age of 5, when your child is 5 and still looks in a baby-like fashion or a toddler-like fashion, so what's going to happen 5, 7 years later? This is very, very vague, right? So, and there's always a question if it's going to happen. right? And then the second question, which is going to be very important. All right, if it's going to happen, whatever I build, is this going to be enough to fully offset? See, because even in the story of those pigs, the big red wolf was actually quite inventive, right? So you see, he couldn't break through the door, he couldn't break through the wall. Well, like, he couldn't break through the usual entries, and then he still tried to go through the chimney, right? So you see, he still had a whole bunch of different attempts. He wasn't just trying and then leaving. And then also he had some, whatever, other tricky moves, like hiding in the background, waiting until the pigs would come out. Like, there's a lot of different levels there. So the question is, okay, if I spend all this time building this bigger house, like a defense for the future, is it going to be enough? Or is the big red wolf still going to make his way through? Well, with lesser probability, with the greater chances of kind of scaring him away or holding your own ground, but you never know, right? So you never know how strong is a hurricane. So then, if you don't like the process itself, it's purely delayed prevention, like, what do you say? I could have been singing and dancing, I could have had good times and good years, and then if I didn't enjoy them enough, well, wasn't it all in vain? So therefore, the third level, which we have to get out of this story, is actually this, is that it's about the process. It's how well you understand the process and how much do you enjoy, right? So you see, it's understand, enjoy, and being happy, not with the easygoing activities outside, but with something which is more subtle, which has kind of this transformative thing, but that transformative thing requires a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation of the details, unlike the singing and dancing, which is supposed to be relatively self-evident and just the easy thing to do. So that's really important to understand, because the reality is that in the CP field overall, it's not only you as a parent who might be in that singing and dancing department, but actually the entire philosophy of the rehabilitation is about this, trying to keep the function to the maximum and getting all these things, and sort of celebrating, well, how important it is to be with other children, how important is it to stand, how important is it to move, and all this other stuff, whilst not even being able to analyze or appreciate anything that is happening within the basic horizontal position, right? Nobody really analyzes respiration. Nobody really analyzes the connection to the ground. Nobody really analyzes the transitions. Nobody analyzes all these things. Everything is big. Oh, does he lift the head or does he not? Does she turn around, being able to turn from her back to her front and vice versa? Whether the child is flipping or whether the child is doing the true move, nobody cares. So any kind of look-alike is going to be, seen as a true action. The same thing about the fake, the inability to distinguish between the fake crawling and the true one, the fake sitting and so on, the fake standing, the fake walking, and all these other multiple fakes. So that is really the question. And in that sense, I very much understand that when offering the long-term strategic perspective, I'm very much in a solo department, and you're not going to have a second or third or the fourth opinion, whatever, which is going to help you say, oh, by the way, we also think the same. Well, no, because everybody is in the same boat. There could be differences in terms of the styles, right? So you see, because the style could differ. So in the rehabilitation department, you have the styles which are milder and more modern in that sense, and you have their kind of hardcore styles, right? So you see the hardcore styles. For example, Hungary is more the place of the hardcore styles, right? So where they do the old-fashioned, like strong things. If the child has to be trained, he has to be trained for multiple hours. So there is no such thing as laziness. There is no such thing, I don't want, you have to do it. It has to be done, right? Or there is a milder version. Oh, wow, let's enjoy together and sing and then celebrate and all this kind of stuff, right? Or, of course, from the perspective of the structural deformation prevention, there is also the thing, oh, we have to force these moves, we have to make it, and even if it hurts for now, it's for the good cause, and so on and so forth. So this is where you have all these methods like Voita and so on, when the children are screaming, but the parent saying, oh, wow, or the therapist saying, well, we have to endure this because this is for the greater good. So that's, in that respect, those logics, you might find the differences. So there are hardcore styles which could be sort of seen as well. Like, oh, they're also looking ahead. They're also saying that you have to postpone gratification and so on and so forth. But the logic of theirs is still the same. So it's still the same strategy of building those, let's call them, this would be the house of sticks as opposed to the house of straw, right? So you see, that will be the hardcore style of trying to do the stretches and all the other things. So, but strategically, they are not able to look beyond the growth spurt because they don't have any way, any distinct or detailed analysis of what actually happens during this period. They don't track what happens to children, in any level of the sophistication. And therefore, for them, there is just, okay, we try doing it until the whole, like, bad wolf comes and destroys whatever we've done. So, and the statements about the prevention, they are just really meaningless because, let's put it this way. It's a very, very simple thing. If we ask a very straightforward and direct question, who does the systematic filming of children at different stages, and who does the systematic analysis of the elementary movements and the transitions and so on, so which are being done? Who does it? Nobody. Look, the reality is that every single assessment, even the video assessment, so on, like, I'm going to do at least 30, 40 specific comparisons of how different elements move. And in fact, for myself, I do probably like 2-3 times more. So we, like, when we study what happens to your child, we study it at details and nuances. In fact, following them up every 6 to 12 months. And we have, of course, a major archive of observing what happens to children over the long periods of time, which nobody else has. Because if you look at what is available about your child, even in the most sort of expensive and fanciful hospitals of the world, there would be the same few lines of X-ray description or some lines of range of motion measurements, and on an absolutely separate note, there would be few inserts about the gait analysis, but there would be nothing cohesive. Nobody is going to start with, okay, what is the fundamental condition of the child today to begin with, right? So what's happening in their essential situation when they haven't even started moving? What is their basic thing? where are they, right? So you see, and this is really something that we have to understand very, very clearly, because in that sense, this is what we are really looking at. So you see, we are looking not just at the muscles as such or the skin layers as such, right? So you see, we are then looking at the most basic and the fundamental things about this original build of the body. What are the basic compartments, how the respiration is working, and so on and so on, so on and so forth. So which is not on the map of the people who are doing the surgeries and who are promoting the walking, who are promoting all these things and so on. So that is really, you might say, hey, Mr. Blyum, you've been already talking for about an hour, but you didn't tell us much about the SPML itself. Well, what am I doing? I am actually discussing what's underneath, right? So you see, because SPML, as you can see, is just a tool. So the only thing that they've done there is change the big scalpel for the small tool, for the small scalpel, as we have already seen it. And because, of course, when you do the big scalpel, you probably do 10, 20, or something like this cuts. And when you do a small scalpel, you do hundreds of cuts. That's the technical difference. And fortunately, yes, the small cuts, the hundreds of small cuts, they heal better than tens of the big cuts. That's the reality. So therefore, in that sense, yes, as I already said, the small surgery is better than the large surgery. But the question is that we are going back to the strategy. What do we actually want? What is our big picture? What we are trying to achieve? And what are the references that we are having for the person's development? So that is really the big picture. And without the conversation about this big picture, we are stuck, because then you're going to look at this, see these people here, the one that I started from. So you see, what is the evidence? Is selective percutaneous myofascial lengthening an effective treatment for children with cerebral palsy? The question is, what do you guys consider a treatment? What is your timeline? What do you look at, on the big scale? What kind of analysis do you have for this? So that's the thing. If you are only assessing the functional comparisons without even analyzing kind of the details of movements, you're not going to be able to compare things for nuances, right? So you see, if, in other words, if the child's development has to be analyzed maybe on let's put it like this, right? So you see, you have to track, say, 200 different parameters to get a sort of a cloud of understanding of how the things are happening, and you're only tracking 10 and missing the other 190 or more and unable to scale them into anything meaningful, well, are you going to be able to assess the situation? So that's really the question to ask, because you see, if you look at this, then they start talking about this. Okay, what SPML claims as several improve the movement ability of children to sit, stand, or walk. Well, the question is, in which timeline and how do you measure the quality, right? So you see, if you only measure the distances, if you only measure the willingness to cover and so on, that's one story, right? If you measure the support and so on. But where does it lead you to? How do you do this, right? Because you see, for example, in one of those ones here, you see, for example, see, look, this is it. So they are doing this self-promotion, saying, look at that, a case example of a patient treated by multi-level fibrotomy. So you look at this and say, wow, Great progress, right? Because before the legs were twisted in, and now the legs are open up, and then he's able to stand, and so on and so forth. So, isn't it a fantastic achievement? And rightfully, they're using it in their promotion, and they're using it in their kind of way of explaining things. So, but the question is this really the improvement? You say, wow, Mr. Blyum, are you crazy? You know, asking this question, is this really the improvement? Look at this before and after. But I will repeat my question, because my question is going to be, how sustainable is this? Sustainable in the long run. And what kind of the qualities we are developing for this child? So, because we go back to the same story. Yes, here you've started to use the legs, but at which expense? Are you already ready to use the legs? What is going to stabilize those legs? If you don't have the active toes, if you don't have the right connections at the knees, if you don't have the right trochanters, if you don't have the right pelvis, and so on and so forth. So yes, in other words, if we measure this situation, what does it mean? What is the deep meaning of this situation? The deep meaning of this situation is very simple. So this kid is missing the good connection at the level of the millimeters and the millisecond controls, and thus the body blocks him at the level of the big centimeters, or more precisely decimeters, right? So you see, if I kind of get the American version, I should have said that he's being blocked at the fractions of inches. Where would you have this? So those would be fractures of inches, and this would be feet. So multiple feet. So this is, for those who don't know, the foot is about 30 centimeters, right? One American foot is 30 centimeters, an inch is 2.5 centimeters. So, that's why they divide them further into these fractions of inches. So in other words, this upper leg is about a foot long. So why is it blocked? What is our understanding? Our understanding is very simple. He is unable to take the loads from the ground and be able to distribute them well enough to reach the millimeters. That's why it has to be it goes into decimeters, into the long links, right? The super short, if we put it like this, right? So you see, if we put it in words, so if super small areas don't work, then the long lines, they shield those small areas and they take the loads. That's what you see here. And these loads are not very, that way of using these long lines is not compatible with walking, because walking is the activity that gets the most of the loads onto the body, which then have to be absorbed, which have to be distributed, which you have to, because every time you walk, you land on the ground and there is a ground reaction force, right? So this ground reaction force is the one which comes back into the body and which has to be absorbed there. And then the question mark, where is it going to come in? So this first situation is the body self-preventing that walking from happening and thus protecting itself from, the exposure. And what do we have as a second case? The second case is this. So if the child was not able to do the super small, right? So this is super small areas and volumes, they don't work. So, as I said, in this scenario, the long lines protect. And then, in this case, what is a big surgery? It's trying to flip big surgery, is trying to do the long lines directly. So, but the long lines is too crude, and it too comes with too much of their additional side effects, like scarring and so on and so forth. So in that sense, what do we have? We have a second option. We have a second option, which would be using using the small lines, hundreds of them, to do the cuts along those lines where you had the protective ones, which were not allowing things to happen, and cheat the whole thing. So that's it. So that's a cheat. So where the fundamental thing is that you don't have the super small areas and volumes, super small, millimeters. So that's, 1/1000th of a meter not working. Here, the long lines, that would be 1/10th. So in other words, the connections which are 100 times larger, just blocking and preventing this from taking place. So what is this SPML and so on? This is a cheat that goes between 1/1000 and 1/10 and takes a scale about of 1/100th, so the centimeters, in other words, half inches, if you put the American ones. So it goes into 100, so like kind of this 10x cheat, and build this line. So on paper, everything works great. But we ask the same question. Guys, walking is not only a joy, fun, and pleasure. Walking is the big exposure to loads, right? So it's kind of work. So it's a big exposure to loads. And then the question is, well, is your child ready to take the loads elsewhere? And this is the thing which I have to repeat and pretty much every single assessment, because then we go back to our famous thing. We ask the question, there is the volume, this is it. So you've got this. So if your total volume, if your total capacity is not there, is not capable of withstanding and keeping the periphery, then periphery is going to come at you. So it's going to find holes in your defense because the body is going to now have the big centimeter loads, right? And the small centimeter loads and the big centimeter loads, which are going to come at the body from all sorts of things. And then don't be surprised. Then you're going to have all sorts of additional troubles. So, because your torso is not ready to deal with. And that's what we are bringing as the usual thing. So here was the original embryo, right? So you see, but this is our standard conversation, which you have heard from me in different versions multiple times. So if we look here, so this is the usual combination where we keep bringing it all over again. You know, as I said, it's not going to be new. Here we are. This is the attachment of the legs. This is the attachment of the spine, right? So this is the iliopsoas triangle. But the ilio part of the iliopsoas, this is the ilio part. This is the part that provides the horizontal distribution on the inner facets of the pelvis. In your children, and in that even milder child, it doesn't work. So what do you have? You have the loads then coming with vengeance. They are then going directly from the legs to the spine. And that spine is not designed to deal with it. And then you get all sorts of troubles from it. So that is the part. But you see, the current perspective is so narrow. So because the conversation about whether the surgery works or not goes purely into this domain. Like, okay, what are the after effects? Do we have some kind of troubles there? No, okay, so that the actual damage is not that great. So do we see the improvement of the ranges of motion? Yes, of course we do. Do we see the improvements in this overall functional ability more or less immediately? Yes, we do. Does the positioning look nice and straighter? Yes, it does. So, and this is here, you see, like, where does it all start from? It starts from here, right? So you see, this is where they try in this lecture, in this kind of short presentation, they try to reiterate the explanation of how the whole spasticity thing works. And here it is. Muscle tone is then maintained by a circuit of information passing along nerves to and from the spinal cord, and so on. So muscles are stretched, the sensory nerves, this and this, the signal. So, and then spasticity can prevent, so, and cerebral palsy affects those controlling signals from the brain, and the muscles contract without the person being able to control it. That's the spasticity. That's the explanation, okay? So, and spasticity can prevent muscles from growing and blah, 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 right? And then you ask yourself a question, okay, but what about, they speak so confidently about the muscle tone, but does anybody know what muscle tone is? And the answer is not really. So because if you go here, muscle tone definition. Muscle tone is the amount of tension or resistance to movement in muscles. That's it. There is no good definition of muscle tone. There is no good measurement of the muscle tone besides of the manual experiences of how it all feels. But then, if you ask a question, are there good scales, good ways of studying how it feels on any kind of sophisticated manner? No. There is a so-called Ashworth scale, which goes from 1 to 5, and this Ashworth scale, I'm going to give you this Ashworth scale. Scale for spasticity. Here you go. That's all you have. And it's now called MAS, Modified Ashworth Scale. Ta-da! Here you go. And you can read it. It has exactly 5 points to it. See, that's it. No increase in tone, slight increase in tone with the catch release, then halfway through the range catch release, marked increase, considerable increase, and then rigid. That's it. This is all that you practically have for the analysis of the tone. See, all these fancy words, all this fancy stuff and so on, but the actual key concept, what is a muscle tone? How is it linked with the tone of fascia? How is it linked with the distribution and so on? All these things, they're not there. Because historically, everybody has been focused on one thing. And you see, that's the theme that has been offered for me, right? You see, neurons sending signals. This is a theme that my PowerPoint offered me when it saw the word surgery and some sort of AI assistant said, okay, I'm going to use a stock image, which is going to look like this. So because everybody is so hooked up on the signals and nobody is studying what is happening around it. Like how do you get the distribution of loads, which is much less easily calculable, understandable thing, and so on and so forth. So therefore, right, so you see this is, here they discuss things. Okay, so the incisions are made through the skin. It's sometimes described as a minimally invasive surgical technique, so as a keyhole surgery. I mean, again, that's what we talked about, that the costs are lower, but in fact, like the side effects are lower, but the logic is the same, right? Because the conventional surgery is to lengthen the muscle and tendon as an open surgery, and here, things are much less invasive. And here they talk about the fact, no, you don't have enough studies to show the proof that it works and so on, so that whatever the famous American ones who are the Dr. Ingwe and Dr. Nutso, well, we hear more often about Dr. Nutso, so or Nazarov and so on. So there are not so many which are, well, I mean, they have only their own reports, not enough of the control groups and so on. So they try to drag it into the usual storyline or that these people are not being formal enough. I'm not going to blame the surgeons for not being formal enough, because if you are practicing surgeon, so to be able to deal with all these regulations and the controls and so on, which are being done, is extremely difficult. I'll tell you one thing which I've heard nearly 20 years ago, before the political correctness even set up at the new heights. So when they were doing this, and I heard it in 2005, when I was in Montreal at the kind of ill-fated eventually, but that was open to a great fanfare, International Symposium on the Studies of Touch. And the person who was kind of an opening, well, like a keynote speaker there, was no less than the representative from the American government. So like in Europe, they would be called the Ministry of Health, right? In America, they called National Institutes of Health. So this was the person who was in charge of everything, like related to the field from alternative medicine to physical therapy and so on. And he was saying that they were trying to study massage at the University of Harvard. In order to fulfill the control group alone, it took them screening through about 900 volunteers for back pain to do it statistically valid, right? And nearly $4.5 million back then. So that was 20 years ago. Well, probably it referred to the late 90s, so maybe 25 years ago. So like you could imagine how much more regulations have been put since then, and how much different is the worth of the dollars, which were 25 years ago to the dollars today. So therefore, whenever you hear these complaints about control group and so on and so forth, this is in fact, you either can do a tiny study and be very, very specific in your design so that you kind of, your control group sort of squeezes in, or if you do anything big to get the control group, you're talking about like, seriously, you need to have, I don't know, like a team of dozens of people who are doing nothing else by that. You need to have an advertising budget to get the volunteers and so on and so on. So you're talking about literally millions of dollars and years of preparation just to do that study. So therefore, all these conversations, so you see, I wouldn't be holding this stuff against them, saying, oh, you know what, this Dr. Nutz or whatever, they don't have enough proof that it works and so on. No, it's just what they're trying to prove from my perspective is wrong. I mean, it's just servicing, let's kind of dance till the end of the world, and whatever happens later at the period of the growth spurt, whatever happens, we have nothing to do with this. So you see, like, we're just trying to do our best and then hope that it holds. But nobody really counts the things, how it's related to the return, how it's related to the way how it connects to the torso, how it all links, and what are the true costs and benefits of this. Now, I have already got to 1.5 hours, and I have to be really kind of folding it, but then lately, so you see, I have to tell you this, right? So you see, I have to close this story in some kind of coherent way. So, because in fact, I was, shuffling through my books because of moving, and one of the books kind of fell out, and it's the book which is called the Prime Mover, A Natural History of Muscle. So this is a book from about 2001, which was written by a very prominent biomechanist, so one of the kind of top 3, I guess, who made the popularization of the biomechanics possible. He was quite prolific, so his name was Stephen Vogel. So you see, he died like 7-8 years ago, but he was a professor at Duke University and one of the kind of bigger names in biomechanics, and he was actually a good popularizer. So he was like very active in that field. And his writing style is nice and so on and so on. But of course, he talks purely from the perspective of the muscle as a prime mover, the human body as the machine, the work being done, and so on and so forth. And as we go through this, as we go through, there is really one of the elegant things which really deserves to be talked about. So, see, when they were talking about the muscles, I forgot this fact, or maybe I even, like, it's sort of completely blurred. So you see, in the conversation about the muscles, you see, I show you this, right? I show you the iliopsoas, and we know that in our case, so the iliopsoas and psoas, so the psoas being this triangular connection from the leg to the back. In the case of the children with cerebral palsy, this is particularly stiff, this is particularly overloaded, particularly incompetent. And here's a great quality, here's a great reference. So when the studies of muscles were happening in the 1930s, a famous, well, really famous Hungarian researcher, he's made his name, he was a Nobel Prize winner, something else, but then he switched to this. So, and he said, actually, if we want to study the muscle, we want to study which muscle? We want to study the muscle with the least of connective tissue. So in other words, the least fascialized muscle. That's the logic there, right? The muscle which is going to have most pure fibers. And he said the best way to do it is, since, when you go to a meat restaurant, right? So you actually eat muscles. So if you want to find the best muscle for the studies, you have to look at the right side, not at the left side, the right side, the one which is the most expensive is going to be the right muscle. And da-da-da-dam. So he said, in fact, what is this? The one which is the most expensive type of meat is filet mignon. And the filet mignon is nothing else. Scientifically, it's called muscular psoas. So in fact, indeed, psoas being at the depth of the abdominal cavity, protected from the back by the vertebral column and by in front by the varying mass of the abdomen, this is the muscle which is least intended to take the loads. And when we talk about the cerebral palsy and so on, when we talk about this so-called wonderful results, which we have just seen, say here, this is where you are inviting to get your filet mignon into the least chewable version. So this is the muscle which is completely not designed to take any loads, and then it takes them. So then you have to ask yourself a question. Are you surprised? Then as a result of this, you're going to have all sorts of the multiple trappings of this muscle at the entry and the transitions near the hip joint and so on. So since it's the muscle which is the least designed to do any kind of loads. And again, in cerebral palsy, everybody exploits this muscle so enthusiastically, trying to capitalize. No wonder that first, because there is so much free space, right? So you see, this is the least connective tissued muscle. So therefore, if you start using it, if you are lucky, you can still have a lot of capacity to put the tensional stuff in. So the muscle which was the cleanest, you are using it, so it's just kind of absorbing. So that creates the impression that, oh wow, he's walking so well. But in fact, what you're doing, you're just kind of taking your last resort there, the iliopsoas, and stuff and pack it with as much tension, which is not designed to take, and therefore you shouldn't be surprised that as a result of this, you've got really asymmetrical loads going on the spine, because this muscle is designed just to assist in twisting, right? And then you shouldn't be surprised that it actually catches the traps into this pocket, right? So you see growing muscle into the fixed pocket. This is what we were discussing as part of our webinar on the hip pain, or some questions which I give like last webinar or the webinar before, right? So that's the first thing that you can get from this book. But in fact, that was just a preamble to the bigger story. And the bigger story is this. First of all, discussing the muscle, right? So if you look at the numbers, a muscle is made of muscle fibers, which run parallel to each other. Our calf muscle contains about 1 million. 1 million. So your calf is 1 million fibers. Remember this number. Now we multiply them by, and we read further, each of these in turn is made of 1,000 or so of smaller parallel units. So we multiplied by another 1,000, right? So therefore, instead of 1 million, now we've got 1 billion. 1 billion tiny units already. And then still smaller units line up end to end in each of the myofibril. And those are the sarcomeres, and then there are about 15,000 of them. So now we take the 1 billion and multiply it by another 15,000. What is the end result? It's 15 trillion. I'm not going to carry all these numbers. So it's 15 trillion elementary units which are the sarcomeres, and then within the sarcomeres there are a few thousand of the, like there's a whole bunch of the next of the molecules which are making it. So you see now you're moving into the scale of quadrillions, and this is where they're trying to find the elementary engine for the muscle without covering anything in between. So you've got the muscle, and then you've got the explanation, which goes at the level of the sarcomeres. That's, it's a lot of things being lost along the way, right? But then you look at anything about the muscle, and you see this thing and say, geez, all these things are made about the same way. Like there is never a continuous long thing which is going on. There is never a continuous sort of red fiber of sorts. It's always done this way. Something, reddish, then there is some kind of donut, right? So it's just some single line, then the kind of donut. And you see this happening everywhere, at every scale. So you see, if I go back to this, there is no such thing as one hamstring. There's no such thing. You can't really say, oh, I got one hamstring. It has one end, it has another end on that side, right? But this, say 30 centimeters, there is no such elementary thing as one muscle running 30 centimeters. It's divided into smaller chunks. It's 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. So guess what we are doing when we are doing the gun application, or what we're doing in the kind of earlier days. We are then splitting it into, in other words, teaching it, right? To restore its original overlap of the elementary sectors. That's why what we are doing working. But it takes time. See, that's why we have the protocol, right? Contact, connection, loading, and so on, because all the muscles are waved, so all the fibers are waved, so you see, and that's why we need to control the angle, the length, and the tension at the same time. So we have to control three in one in order to be able to do something transformative for the muscle. Now, SPML divides the muscles into 1 centimeter chunks, but does it by scars. Now, again, is this ecological? I don't think so, right? But then it's a fast way of dividing the muscle, and this is where you can get lucky if the scars go the good way. But then the problem is that nobody stops at that, and the fundamental point is that, people start doing more functions, and more functions are then going to lead to the destruction of the torso, and so on and so on, and then you get all these things accumulated. So you see, the logic is not difficult to understand once you have the knowledge of what you are working with. But then comes that final part. So that's the source of all trouble. There was a big experiment, the critical experiment, which was done in 1952, and I really forgot about that number. I mean, I had some recollection, but not that. But it was actually done in the year 1952. Sometimes you talk about the serendipities. So that experiment, 1952, was about the comparison of what they call the positive and negative work. So let me give you a bit clear idea of what it means. See, here we are. See, there was a very simple experiment. One person, there were 2 riders put on the same bicycle sort of setup. But you see, contrary to the usual tandem, where they go in the same direction. This was the opposite direction. Now, as you can see, and like in fact, the anecdote is this too, the participant, big sturdy guy, so who was pedaling forwards, and the opponent was a relatively petite and not so much of a sporty trained lady. So the fact is that eventually they married, but this guy, so he was like 6'2" or something like this, so an athlete, and she was like, I don't know, half his size. So he was pedaling forwards, right? And then they say the second rider attempted to prevent the backward motion of the wheels, right? Because when this guy rolls, pushes his pedals, her wheels start moving backwards. So he is moving forwards, hers moving backwards. So what she's doing, she is then using the same muscle groups. So he is using them actively for contraction, and she is using them to counteract him in extension modality. And here is the story. So within 10 minutes or so, she drove, she didn't make much of the effort. And the guy who was trying to push forwards, so you see the second rider had no trouble driving the first rider to exhaustion. Or perhaps more accurately, making the first rider drive himself into exhaustion. So he was working very hard, but she was winning easily. And that brings the conversation about the difference between the positive work and negative work. Positive work, yet again, in a strange language is being used. That's the work which is done externally. That is work done by you, by moving objects and so on. That's what we imported from engineering and construction and so on. If you are carrying loads, on over the distance, so this is when you're doing useful, thus positive work. If work being done at you, then it's called negative work. And here, that what happened. So as the whole thing kind of went through, is that the paradox is that the muscle is much, much, much stronger when it comes to the negative work. So muscle is much stronger when it does counteracts. But the point is, that was before the real recognition of fascia, right? And this is where they were still preoccupied with the idea of doing action, doing things. And this is where the whole thing kind of had a chance to be impressed by this experiment and switch the whole thing into the asking questions. But okay, how about the negative work? How about the loads which are coming into the body? Because later on, he discussed, this in this way. Say, well, it all sounds well, as if we need to rearrange our muscle-powered machines to use lengthening rather than shortening contractions of the muscle. And then, unfortunately, that won't do. The efficiencies may be higher in absolute term, but negative remains negative. So it's not the extra work which is being done, it's the work which is done at you. And then, and then here comes a key word. Absorbing energy extracts a cost rather than pays a dividend. So you see, this conversation never received a deep enough consideration, because on the one hand, it could be both, right? Because here he then talks about his own experience as well. So then so his personal experience. So when walking or running, you limit the forward swing of the legs by contracting your gluteal buttocks muscles whilst those muscles are lengthening. So that's negative work. So going uphill, you do almost exclusively positive work. Going downhill, you almost entirely do negative work. And here we go. So he talks about his experience. Where was it? Okay. So here he talks about the way how he walked with somebody towards uphill, and then, then they walked downhill and said the descent seemed easy, but it was evident the next day and some days thereafter that my companion had badly injured her muscles, whilst the activities of going uphill caused her no trouble. So this is two things that we have to consider. So one thing is, in fact, that working at the body, so-called negative work, that is what is much more intense, and that what carries the transformative capacity. If you just do it in a stupid way and aim it at muscles, muscles experience destruction. They get destroyed by the effects of delayed onset muscular soreness and so on. That's what we talk about. If you start using the walking and getting the loads into the muscles of the back, they will get destroyed. And that's what we have with the iliopsoas. This is where we have with the children who start walking without being ready for it. But on the other hand, the same thing, the negative work, the work being done at the body, when you consider that the muscle itself is just a tiny part of the whole set, right? So we just saw it on the previous page, that the muscle itself consists from the meter scale or from the foot long scale, right? It consists of 15 trillion elements. 15,000 times a billion elements. That's what a billion larger elements. That's what it consists of. So that's a scale of nanometers. So when we talk about the scale of millimeters, we're kind of saying, hey, this is the closest that we can do, which is within our senses. But we cannot, right? So you see, if the muscle is made out of the components which are running in billions, we have to respect that. We have to respect those orders of magnitude. So in other words, when we do anything mechanical, we have to consider at least millimeters. How the distribution works through the millimeters, because this is the smallest scale that we can physically connect to and appreciate, which is still not going to be enough, but at least something. But we can definitely not limit ourselves to this unit lengths of the meters or decimeters. So it's just too small. It doesn't give us enough of a size. So that's the first consideration. And the second consideration is this. So we have to go back to this understanding that the muscles, we are going back, and guess where? What is our other super popular thing? You guessed it right. Ta-dam! You guessed it right. This is our video, right? So you see the video of Jean-Claude Gumberto and his depiction of the relationship of a muscle fiber to the surrounding fascia fibers, right? So you see, these are the ones which are measured. There is about 1 million of those in your calf muscle. But you can see for these units how many hundreds and thousands of the fibers which are surrounding it. So that's why the negative work, so-called the absorbing thing that you get from dealing with the environment, this is where it all goes. This is how the mechanical work done by environment at you is being the really massive part, not what you do, but what is being done at you. And this is the part which completely excluded from the current understanding. So you see, this is where we're really coming to, so that we have to appreciate this factor. What is coming at you? So what is the cost of the loads which are coming at you, where they're going to be planted? Now, if you are making a choice and saying, okay, you know what, it doesn't matter for me, I really made my conscious decision. I believe that, when my child is happy now, I want to keep her happy. When she's happy, I want to extend the toddlerhood. This is fine. This is your logic, right? So you're saying, hey, I'm raising, if you are asking me to raise the number 1, number 2, or number 3, I'm raising number 1 or raising number 2. I'm not emotionally connected to number 3, and I would say, guys, absolutely fine. So then we're going to fine tune our conversation, our work with you, our help you. We will be working within this modality because, even when you're lying down, there is all this negative work which is done at you. So all depends on how it's being absorbed. When you're being put in the chair, when you're being put on the standing frame, when you're being put in walking, the more vertical is the position, the more of this work which is being done at you. And if you're not able to distribute that work into those millions and then billions of fibers, and it only comes into the muscle, then it destroys the muscle. And then what happens? Then you have the example of the source and so on, which has quite a lot of capacity to absorb because it's such a clean super muscle. So that's why you can store a lot there, but eventually it's all gone. So in that respect, this is where we started with the SPML, which is being a milder version, right, of dealing where what they see as the trouble with the spastic signals, but as you see, surprisingly, there's not even a definition of tone, right? There's no definition of anything in between. So it's just, oh, these are signals. And then, like, the whole field is just completely full of gaps. And when I said 1952, right? So you see, the interesting thing is my father was born in 1952, right? So you see, that was, the person who really was the first one to deliberately and intentionally and systematically question this kind of definitions of negative and positive work and say, well, if we want to reverse the deformities, we need to find the source of energy for that. So where is that source of energy? That source of energy is our external work. So the only thing that it doesn't channel itself correctly. So what we have to try to do, we have to try to channel it better than it spontaneously does, right? So then the story goes of how exactly to do it, at which scale to do it, and so on. So you see, this is like, it's been close to 30 years of that journey, right? And that's where I went my own way, and that's where we have our next level of, let's say, differences with my father, who still stays more at the scale of like smaller centimeters and this kind of stuff and machines and so on. But fundamentally, this key critical kind of question, what are we going to do? What is the source of the transformation? Can we change anything via self-work? The answer is none, because this is a positive, so-called positive work. You are burning energy. You're not bringing things in. And if you're not aware that whatever you do when you are when you are in contact with the ground, any contact brings the mechanical energy, mechanical strain into whether you want it or not. And therefore you have to distribute it. It has to be distributed from the very large, thick entry of this sort of scale of meters or scale of big decimeters. It has to then split, right, as you see there, from one big muscle into the million fibers. You could imagine how effective this branching mechanism should be, and what is that primary role of fascia, which is providing this ability to spread and distribute and so on. And if that mechanism is not working, so what happens? It gets stuck at the level of meters and decimeters, right? It doesn't go from the level of the feet, from the scale of the feet. It doesn't go to the level of, milestones, right? From the level of feet, it doesn't go to the level of inches. It doesn't go into those little inch pebbles or, fraction of an inch pebbles and so on, smaller and smaller. It doesn't happen. So then it gets stuck, and then the body has the limits of how much it can absorb. As a result, you get the spasticity. Spasticity is an ability of the muscle to absorb any more. That's why it blocks. That's it. So if you cut it and say, hey, now it can absorb a bit more, but you already ruined it, so you see, because you can be sure that you start using it again, it will, and the capacity will run out. So SPML is an easier way of doing it, right? You do micro cuts, so you see, and then they use the scars as a sort of bridges for the division of the muscle. Well, it will work better than the big surgeries, but the logic is still from completely different. It's still the same logic as the big surgery, and this is where we have the fundamental difference. So it turned out to be a 2-hour passage. I hope that our audiences will have the patience to go through, and probably will need to do some of this division into some chunks and blocks. But if I were doing this sort of presentation from a theoretical level, I probably should have started from the other side, right? So you see, from the end of today's conversation. But then for you as the parents, that would be less experiential, right? So you see, like, what is that? So that's why I kind of tried my best to move from the experiential and build it, and at the same time, put it into the big context, rather than discussing the small components of what is the immediate effectiveness of these surgeries. So I try to bring it into a larger picture. And again, as always, it comes back to the story of the 3 pigs and what kind of strategy you are choosing as a parent. So I think with that, we can say goodbye to our audiences for now. So it's been pretty much exactly 2 hours. So I hope it's been entertaining and important. And look, it's a big decision, which in fact highlights and kind of puts the additional like flavors and lights on what sort of the super big decision that you are making, and the invitation for you to be consistent, right? And again, I want to be understood correctly that in no way I express my disagreement with the first pig and the second pig strategy, and the laugh, dance, and sing strategy. I mean, it's a strategy which is a strategy. As long as you understand where you are and what you want, we're fine. So, but again, I also make it very clear that my deep strategy is the strategy of the third pig, right? So you see, but you're not just looking for the prevention, you're looking at the being interested in the process of creating things, right? Of transforming them at the smaller increments. And of course, whenever we are able to combine the two, like when it comes to the pain, hip pain preventions and so on and so forth. So we are doing better than anyone else, in their cutting tools and so on, because simply whatever we are discharging the source and the entries into it, and they are charging the source, right? So you see, they are trying to get the straightness, but at the expense. But the straightness comes with the expense of using the same triangle. And when I say source, I include everything, right? The quadratus and so on, the whole frog thing. So our original buccal conversation that we had the other day. Okay, so cheers, all the best, and of course, send us questions if you want to understand more and get additional help in clarifying your understanding and situation. Cheers.